Next on the agenda, we have a workshop. Walt, Wolfram, and Jeffrey Reaser from North Carolina State University and Duke University, who are going to present on language awareness in middle school, an experimental program.
First of all, a couple of announcements. During the day, we'll be showing various documentaries that we produced for public TV in North Carolina. As a matter of fact, one on Appalachian speech called Mountain Talk aired last night on PBS in North Carolina. They will be shown throughout the day, but there is one change. A couple of the vignettes that you'll see this morning, as we use them in our educational program, come from an upcoming documentary that will air in October, along with the national show by Robin McNeil called Do You Speak American, a three-part series on the dialects of American English. And that vignette contains a number of things that we use in our educational program. So we consider, for example, Cherokee language, Spanish, African American English, and a couple of other varieties, mountain speech, coastal speech, and so forth. And we aren't done with it yet, but we have a 30-minute version of it that we're going to change the schedule, and anyone who's interested in seeing more of some of the vignettes that we showed you this morning can see that at 2 o'clock, wherever the videos are scheduled to be shown. All right. This also will be a little different session in the sense that we're going to try to demonstrate to you some of the programs that we use. For the last 10 years, we have experimented in one school in North Carolina teaching a program on dialect awareness. And I can assure you, I couldn't bring the kids along for testimonials, but it has changed the whole attitude of the community about language differences, including the kids, including the parents. They feel differently about language differences. So we'll be speaking a lot from our experience. We've also taught similar programs in the western part of the state, in the mountains, and elsewhere on occasion. And now we're ready to launch a statewide program that we hope Jeff Reaser will be doing as part of his dissertation in an experimental program. Okay. So a lot of what we say and the exercises that we share with you are based on this program that we've been teaching for the last 10 years in Ocracoke, which is a small school on the island of Ocracoke off of the coast of North Carolina that has a very distinct dialect. All right. So why is there a need for education to begin with? Well, first of all, there is an entrenched American ideology about language differences, which has been described as the principle of linguistic subordination. And basically that principle maintains this, that if you speak a language variety associated with a subordinate group, that language variety will be considered as inadequate and an unworthy approximation of standard English. All right? And people ask the question, and Kirk addressed this somewhat before, why are languages standard? Duh. Because the people who rule happen to speak those varieties. It ain't that difficult, really. And the accidents of history certainly demonstrate that. Double negatives are stigmatized today, but in the time of Chaucer and so forth, they were totally legitimate and the only way of forming certain kinds of negatives. So we have to understand this relationship and how the principle of linguistic subordination has affected all of our lives, including me. And I've been preaching the gospel for 40 years. I was a teenage preacher. That's true. And I never stopped preaching. Okay. Secondly, there's a kind of miseducation of the American public. And in this language socialization, vernacular varieties, or those that are out of the mainstream, are considered these illegitimate versions of dominant language varieties. All right? And this actually constitutes, I'm from Philadelphia, so I say constitutes rather than constitute, one of the great scientific myths of modern society. In fact, I would say that the myths that we have about language differences are akin to a modern geophysicist maintaining that the planet Earth is flat. That's fairly strong, but it actually turns out to be fairly true. And this is not sort of radical, liberal, university professor politics. Conservative linguists or missionaries believe the same thing. Because actually, that's how I got into linguistics. I wanted to be a missionary and save the world. Furthermore, there is no established tradition in mainstream education. Where did you learn about language differences? I learned about them when I was in elementary school, when somebody said, don't say that, don't write my mother she, and don't say I didn't do nothing. All right? That was my education to the world of language differences. Basically, I was corrected. The correctionist model is how most of us learn about language differences. We may have come to different conclusions based on our own sophistication, but so the initial challenge we have is to establish that there's a need for information about language differences. Now, I'm a linguist, and I've been a linguist for a long time. I'm not a secondary teacher. I'm not a middle school teacher, although every year I go into a school and teach for an hour and a half every day for a week this program. All right? So we have a challenge. All right? And our challenge is tailoring linguistics for grade appropriate audiences. I'm not a curriculum writer either. Neither is Jeff. We've been struggling with it, but we have to get it in language that's appropriate for the audiences of the students. And we're working on that, and we will get curriculum writers to work with us on that. There are issues relating to meta-language and terminology. If you haven't caught that from some of this morning's lecture, linguists are very jargony. And sometimes terms that they use and everybody understands, the world doesn't understand. Or people outside of the 5,000 linguists in the world. All right. Or even terms that seem to be common may have different meanings to different audiences. So linguists use the term dialect as a neutral term without any pejorative connotations. In the world that I grew up in, and in many worlds, it's used as a pejorative notion. You speak a dialect means that you don't speak proper in some way. And these are things that we have to negotiate. So maybe either we have to educate folks as to how we're going to use dialect, or in fact say, okay, let's just use language differences, which is a more neutral term. Or ebonics. We stay away from the term ebonics because it conjures up sort of all kinds of images of ratifying bad speech, of radical politics in the schools, and of stupid school boards. It's kind of funny because I've been teaching all of these years, and they finally got a new principal in the school who happened to come from an English department and taught English. And the first thing I walked in when I went to introduce myself in the program that we've been teaching for these 10 years was, this isn't about ebonics. I said, oh no. Okay, so we have to understand that there are things that we have to do to accommodate ideologies, to accommodate interpretations, and so forth. All right, we also have to understand the non-linguistic background of teachers. Many of you don't have a linguistic background. If we're going to teach linguistic notions, either we have to give you adequate background in it, or stay away from our jargon. And there's a little bit of both. But by the same token, teachers teach lots of things that they aren't specialists in. A teacher may teach history, but is not a historian. They just happen to teach history. And then the last issue that we have to deal with is deal with our linguistic stereotypes and prejudices. To be socialized in American society, and this is true of me as well as anyone else, is to have linguistic prejudice. And in our society, linguistic prejudice and language discrimination are the last door to discrimination, and the door is still wide open, as one of our colleagues writes. All right? And we have to recognize